dear Medyascope viewers, welcome to This Week in Turkey. This evening our guest will be Professor Ali Alpar. He'll be joining us to speak about academic freedoms in Turkey in light of the recent appointment of Melih Bulu as rector to Boğaziçi University. Demonstrations at Boğaziçi University are ongoing against the appointment of Bulu as the new rector of the university. The protests by students and academic staff alike are occurring on the grounds that he comes from outside the ranks of the university and his academic credentials are questionable.
Protests have been taking place at the Boğaziçi University of Istanbul. This week, thousands of people outside the university campus in Istanbul protested for the government-appointed university rector to resign. Among the protesters, there were not only students but also university academics, in solidarity with the students. Other universities in various cities across Turkey also held walks and protests to show support and reaction. There was heavy police presence around the university campus, and 24 students were taken into custody during the protests. Out of the 24 detained students, 2 were sent to the court for arrest. The remaining students were released under judicial control. The police used tear gas, water cannons, and rubber bullets to break up the protests. The protests are related to the controversial appointment of a new university rector by a presidential decree by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, issued on January 1st. Melih Bulu, who stood as a parliamentary candidate for Justice and Development Party in 2015, has been appointed to be the new Boğaziçi University rector. On the same day, through the president's right of appointing university rectors, 4 other universities of Beykoz University, Pamukkale University, Antalya Bilim University, and Çağ University have been appointed a new rector by President Erdogan. The decision was met with outrage from the student body and faculty members, who interpreted Bulu's appointment as an attempt at curtailing academic freedoms, saying the new rector was the first to be chosen from outside the university community since the 1980 military coup. The new rector, Melih Bulu, has released a statement on Twitter in which he hopes to bring people together at the university and continue to make it one of the top higher education institutions in the world. When he was asked on national television whether he was considering to resign as the student body had been protesting, Melih Bulu said he was not considering to bend to that pressure. He said that his appointment has met global standards. The ruling AKP has also defended Bulu's appointment as legal. The AKP spokesperson Ömer Çelik commented that it is not a crime for a person to have a political view. The new rector of Boğaziçi University is also alleged to have plagiarized part of his doctoral dissertation and other academic papers. Boğaziçi is a state university with a socio-economically diverse student body. Often described as Turkey's most prestigious university, it has a long-standing reputation for tolerance and intellectual independence. It was one of the few academic institutions in the country to defy the secular state's ban on headscarves on university campuses in 1997. The ban on headscarves was lifted when Erdogan came into power. In accordance, through Erdogan's regime, new laws that gave the government the authority to appoint rectors in lieu of letting universities elect their own came into practice as well. This particular measure is one of the tightening of the government's control on universities.
Good evening, Professor Alpar. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So today was the 5th day of protests at Boğaziçi University. The academic staff and students of the university are protesting the government-appointed rector, Melih Bulu. Yet this is not the first government-appointed rector to Boğaziçi. In 2016, Erdogan had appointed Mehmet Özkan as well. And we'll speak more about the structural problems of higher education in Turkey and their impact on academic freedoms. But first, I'd like to ask you, Professor, in what ways is the appointment of Melih Bulu different from the previous appointment of Mehmet Özkan as rector?
Well, let me draw a wider framework, because the current situation is highlighted by what's going on at Boğaziçi University. But the situation, the, in quotes, legal framework, of course, affects all universities, whether publicly funded or privately funded. All universities in Turkey are under a very hierarchical system called YÖK, the Central Universities, Central Higher Education Board. And in 2016, there was a decree with the power of law, which restricted the system of selection, I should say, of university presidents in Turkey for all universities in the following way. Before 2016, the strictures of YÖK had been expanded a little bit by the efforts of universities, led by, first example being generated by the efforts of Boğaziçi University. Because the whole system of YÖK was set up by the 1980 military coup. And under this setup was historically the first time that Boğaziçi University had been appointed a president without consultation by any members of the university. And following that, there was a period where all universities were governed by such appointed directors. In 1992, I believe, Boğaziçi University was the first among Turkish universities to negotiate with the then government and with the Central Universities Board to expand the system such that the universities with their own procedures would select 3 candidates for presidency, which they would submit to YÖK, and then YÖK would approve one of them. And then the situation was that YÖK would usually appoint the first choice of the university, and the method of selection by the universities, in all cases for government-funded universities, state universities, was by vote of the faculty. But the important point is not whether the selection is made by a vote or a search committee or whatever. There are different ways, but in any case, each university, of course, should have the primary say in determining its president by its own traditions. Okay, and the system was expanded to allow that in 1992. Coming back to more recent history, in 2016, a government decree with the power of law. We have these ways of changing the law, unfortunately, at present in Turkey. So with this decree, it was foreseen that YÖK would bring up a list of 3 candidates for presidency of any university, and the president would appoint one of them, or if he didn't choose to appoint any of those, the president could appoint his own selection. That applied to all state universities, and for foundation universities, the system was, instead of YÖK, the boards of trustees would propose 3 candidates, and again, the final appointment would be made by the president. And many universities, including Boğaziçi University with the previous rector, tried to find a compromise. Even though in 2016, after that adjustment to the rules, what Boğaziçi University had Boğaziçi University had selected, the extension of the previous president's term, was now overrun by this new decree because the YÖK didn't have to even not only didn't have to ask the university for their choices, didn't have to heed any signs from the university. And Professor Özkan was not the university's choice, but he was someone who was a member of faculty in the university, and he was supported by by the faculty as someone who was their colleague and they could work with, and who was to abide by the traditions of that particular university. Now, in 2018, even that was overruled. From 2018 on, the step of the Higher Education Board proposing candidates was no longer required. The new rule put this into operation, that the president, on his own, would appoint the rector of any state university, and again on his own, though the boards of trustees can recommend candidates, again on his own, he would make appointments of the president to any privately funded university as well. So at the moment, according to these changes in the rules, which are not even proper laws, okay, the president of the Republic in Turkey is the sole person to appoint university rectors. Now, to appoint by an external authority is already extremely problematic. And the law does not stipulate any procedures of consultation with any administrative bodies or faculty, or of course not the students of the universities. So this is the background.
Thank you so much for tracing that complicated background and how the YÖK, particularly the Committee of Higher Education, has taken on an important role since 1980, and how this has also changed since 2016 and again in 2018. Now, what has also been noticed with the appointments of these new rectors by the president is that they're organically linked somehow to the AKP, to the ruling Justice and Development Party. And so these backgrounds suggest that their appointments are not necessarily thus based on merit. In the Science Academy's report on academic freedoms, you also identify some characteristics of these government-appointed rectors. Could you perhaps speak about some of these negative consequences of universities being stripped from their right to self-governance? And will this politicization of universities along partisan lines have lasting effects?
Okay, thank you for bringing up the Science Academy reports. The Science Academy, for the last 5 years, has been issuing reports on the state of academic freedom in Turkey. And these are also available in English translation on our website, bilimakademisi.org. Okay. So what I've summarized is available there, and in our current report on academic freedoms, just issued last month, okay, there is a section titled Rectors and Merit, Academic Merit. Now, whether a rector is has ties with a political party is not the primarily important point. That may be secondary if it really did not play a role. And what played a role was the academic capacity, the academic merits of a particular rector. A simple measure of academic merit is whether a person, a scientist, a scholar, an academic, has produced research which has been published after proper peer reviewing in appropriate academic journals. Now, there's a lot to be qualified, and I'll come back to that if I have time. But solely on the quantitative basis of how many papers a university president has published, there's a, I don't remember the actual numbers, you may dig them up, but there's a significant number of university presidents in Turkey's universities, not in the front-running universities like Boğaziçi, of course, but there's a significant number overall who have a zero record of academic publication. Okay? And there's another large fraction, significant fraction of Turkish university presidents who have some publications with zero citations. So these publications have not been regarded as worthy of attention, of significance by the international academic community. Now, one might argue that the university president could be somebody who excels in her or his administrative qualities, but certainly a degree of achievement in research and a proper record in teaching should be a requirement by whoever is making these choices. And that is not the case. Mm-hmm. Now, I would like to add one thing to this. Yes. The number of publications is a necessary requirement. It is not a sufficient measure because there are many cases, not just in Turkey, internationally, this is a big problem. There are many academics with numerically bloated academic records, large numbers of publications, and even large numbers of citations to their work, but the quality of the work is not significant. In the good cases, this may be because the work reports routine and important results like measurements of the properties of certain materials or statistics for clinical statistics from medical faculties, which are useful so people cite them, but they do not involve any creativity, any original contribution. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the good explanation for high citations. The bad explanation is there is a worldwide problem of very low standard journals which publish for money, who don't have or have very low standards of reviewing. And these serve in many countries of the world, including Turkey, for people to promote their careers by saying, you know, see how many publications I have. So what's the answer to that? The answer is quality requires actual studying evaluation of a person's academic record, what he or she has done, what they have said, is it really important in some way? Okay, and that is relevant because the current appointee to Boğaziçi University does have, as I understand from his declarations to the press, have a record of publications, but there are also questions about those publications, and I don't want to go into detail because I'm not in a position to. I haven't looked at those publications, okay? But it is very easy for experts to look and judge. This I should underline.
Coming back to Boğaziçi University and the protests that we are seeing there, they've received actually a lot of solidarity, especially from students of other universities, but we've also seen the academic staff both protesting the rector and supporting their students. Yet these protests have been quick to be criminalized by the government and its media. I mean, students protesting have been subjected to house raids and detentions in the last 5 days and so forth. And the criminalization of opposing voices is quite systematic in Turkey. And we'll talk about the brain drain, what they call the brain drain in a bit. Do you think getting organized is important? I mean, in what other ways can academics and students express their dissent, and how can protest extend to yield results in order to restore integrity to the academic profile of Turkey?
Well, I think academic freedom is very closely linked with democracy. Just like freedom of expression, which is an integral part of academic freedom, and freedom of the press and other basic democratic freedoms. So any peaceful expression of opinion, I will not say should be natural in a university, should be natural anywhere in a democratic society. And we have problems there. And if you look at international research on comparing countries according to their standards of democracy and their standards in academic freedom, you compare the maps of the world, you see a very close correlation. There will usually be some elements who try to introduce violence deliberately to provocate whatever, okay? This does not speak for the real protesters, which are very much in their right, Boğaziçi University, but it does serve by by the proponents of lies, okay, post-truth, as we see in all over the world, to deliberately not report what is being said, or deliberately not answer the questions that are put, but create a false image, a false range of reporting, and so on. And that's going on. Now, what can academics do? I think they are doing at Boğaziçi what they can do peacefully, protesting, showing that they are not content with being appointed externally, being presented with this appointee, okay? And of course, after the structural problem, a discussion of the merits And the evidence for those merits of the appointee will come into question. Academics are experts on this. And this is not something very difficult, even for the citizen. If they are careful, any, I would say, interested and objective and to a degree enlightened citizen will know it's something that's been taught in primary or middle schools, that if you write into your own text a quote, a verbatim quote from some other text, there's a punctuation mark. And this is not academic, this is not research, you know, on any text. And when we are taught in school about punctuation marks, you know, where do you use a full stop, where do you use a semicolon, etc. Where do you use quotation marks? Okay. So this kind of, I mean, there's both an objection to the current set of rules about governing universities, about their particular implementation, and it will come, and it has come, to an academic, but I think not necessarily even academic, at a public discussion of merits of the appointee. And these things, I'm not saying, I mean, these are not things that are decided by authority. These are things that are decided, not very difficult, by evidence. Okay? Yeah. No, without evidence, I'm not in a position to say this or that has happened.
Of course.
But it's very noticeable that sentences put forth as explanations are not, you know, can be questioned.
Yeah.
Are not very convincing.
The reason why I asked Professor about the criminalization was just to lead to the next question, which has to do with the brain drain from Turkey. Now, due to the restrictions and the erosion of freedom in universities, many have had to leave, whether it's because of they were academics for peace or the purges that happened in 2016. Many academics have left the country to work abroad as a result of this climate of fear that has been governing, you know, opposing voices in universities. So you mentioned, you know, the Science Academy's report also mentions, you know, the scientific merit of certain deans and rectors in Turkey. So how do you see the future of academia in Turkey in terms then of the scientific output and how its educational capabilities for future generation in the context of the brain drain will be affected?
Well, it must be understood that the people who are leaving Turkey, young people, or are not returning, are not necessarily those who have already experienced this personally, experienced restriction of freedom in academia personally, but as students or as citizens, they are seeing this going down. And academic research of any kind, I am an astrophysicist, requires an environment where ideas can be expressed freely. Research means you are trying to find, establish new knowledge. Your guesses are subject to tests to search for evidence. They can be falsified, but you should be free to follow whatever ideas, reasonable ideas, of course, to have some success, you want to do research on. And you know, if the head of your department or your head of your research group, okay, for scientific reasons or prejudices, says, you know, this is not promising, don't do this, okay? you might be intimidated. If she or he says, I forbid you to do this, that's very bad. Now it goes beyond the authority in academia, something within the country that's very, all over the place, is interference by authority on matters of expertise, including the performance of scientific research or scholarly work. And in the case of, say, economics or history or political science, this interference by authority can be direct, but also in natural sciences, there's this whole atmosphere, okay? And you don't want to come to a university. It's not just material conditions. I mean, the reason bright Turkish young people are not returning to academia in Turkey, in fact, not returning to professions in Turkey, is this whole atmosphere of restrictions. So what do I foresee? I think there is still a young generation, a number of them in our universities. I hope some of them can hold on. I hope this will, I mean, this cannot go on like that. It is leaving aside all ethical questions and questions of political morality and democracy. From a purely pragmatic point of view, it's sabotaging the country to interfere with the best institutions of higher education and scientific research. And the final thing is, even to understand what is going on in science and technology and in social science, everything in the world, every country has to participate in this effort in a real way to some extent. It is impossible to import technological results and use them in a successful way if you do not have the people who can or who have already contributed to some aspect of the fundamental scientific research underlying. And that affects the future of the country. Mm-hmm. Of course, the presence of democracy also in parallel affects the future of country. I'm an optimist. I hope in the middle run, at least, without further damage, we will come back to real normality, not the new normal.
Professor Ali Alpar, thank you so much for having joined us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Objecting to the certification of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 US presidential elections, supporters of US President Trump stormed the US Capitol Hill. As a response to the violent protests taking place in front of the US Congress, Turkey's government called on all US parties to maintain restraint and prudence.
The US Capitol in Washington, D.C. was placed under lockdown on January 6th after a massive crowd of Trump supporters stormed into the building and looted the Senate chamber and offices in an attempt to overturn the election results. Shortly after Capitol Hill was evacuated, a citywide curfew was put into place to restore safety. At least 4 people died in the attack, including one woman who was shot inside the Capitol building. In response to the scenes of Trump supporters storming the Capitol building on January 6th, Turkey has urged all parties in the US to use moderation and common sense. Releasing a written statement regarding the violent protests, Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, We are following with concern the internal developments happening in the US following the presidential elections, which culminated in the Capitol Hill building being breached by protesters today. We call on all parties in the US to maintain restraint and prudence. We believe the US will overcome this internal political crisis in a mature manner. In accordance, Turkey's parliamentary speaker Mustafa Şentop has also tweeted, "We follow the events in the USA with concern and invite the parties to calmness. We believe that problems will always be solved within law and democracy. As Turkey, we have always been in favor of the law and democracy, and we recommend it to everyone." Regarding the profiles of the people who caused the scenes of chaos at the US Capitol Hill, Gönül Tol stated the following.
In fact, this is a complex profile. One group of Republicans are said to be militarists and extremists. It is certain that there are right-wing extremist groups present, but along with that, there are also mainstream Trump supporters who have voted for Trump and actually think that the election has been stolen due to fraud. And the question right now is, how will these mainstream people face trials? Very few people have been arrested. In comparison to thousands of people who were arrested during the Black Lives Matter protests in June, less than 20 people were arrested during these demonstrations held by the majority of Trump supporters. What makes this even more complicated is that the group who entered the Congress consists of diverse profiles. There are both extremist groups and mainstream pro-Trump groups who genuinely believe that the elections have been stolen.
After the New Year's Eve lottery prize, which stood at 75 million liras, was not claimed, thousands of social media users initiated a campaign to ask the government to reallocate the money to SMA patients rather than the Turkish Wealth Fund.
The grand New Year lottery prize of Turkey, which stood at 100 million liras, was divided into 4 as a quarter ticket won it. However, since the other 3 tickets were not sold, it was announced that 3/4 of this amount will be transferred to the Wealth Fund. In reaction, a social media campaign to allocate the unclaimed 75 million lira lottery prize to the treatment of children who suffer from spinal muscular atrophy was started. People's Democratic Party Deputy Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu mentioned the Family and Social Policies Ministry in a tweet suggesting the allocation of the funds to child SMA patients. The 75 million liras transferred from the National Lottery to the Wealth Fund should be spent on SMA patients. These babies and kids are dying, Gergerlioğlu said. The cause quickly spread on social media with a hashtag that translates roughly to "Give the prize to kids with SMA," with opposition politicians and thousands of social media users supporting it. However, this social mobilization received a backlash from the government. Health Minister Fahrettin Koca''s press release from January 3rd dubbed the efforts to reallocate the funds a dirty campaign and discouraged the public from supporting it. The minister said that there isn't a single SMA patient who can't receive treatment in Turkey and that the state has covered expenses for every single SMA patient. The minister further said that these campaigns are displays of fake heroism and that the issue goes beyond the boundaries of morality and makes the state look weak. Spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, is a neuromuscular disease that causes gradual wasting of muscles. The first type is the one that affects babies in the first months of their lives. The disease is treated either with a drug called Spinraza that is administered every 4 months, or with a gene therapy called Zolgensma, which is a one-off cure for babies under the age of 2 or below 21 kilograms. The gene therapy, despite being added to the foreign medicine list by Turkey, is not covered by the state-run Social Security institution, rendering low and medium-income families much more desperate as they cannot afford it.
According to the data released by the Ministry of Health, as of January 7th, the daily number of new coronavirus cases has been announced as 12,171, including 1,370 symptomatic patients. With these new additions, the tally of infections topped 2.29 million. A total of 194 people lost their lives to the virus over the past 24 hours, bringing the death toll to 22,264.
Various artisan associations, hotel and tourism workers syndicates, and the Istanbul Chefs Associations released a press statement on January 5th in the Kadıköy district of Istanbul. The participants stated that they were simply unable to get by due to the closure of businesses in the tourism and entertainment sectors since November 20th, as preventative measures were implemented to curb the spread of the pandemic. The statement read that the support provided by the government for workers in these sectors during closures of the first and now second wave of the pandemic remained insufficient for them to survive, convicting them to starvation. The participants demanded more aid or the reopening of their businesses.
And now for the economic developments of the week.
Turkey saw a 14.6% annual hike in consumer prices in December 2020. The annual inflation rate rose 0.57 percentage point in the month, up from 14.03% in November, according to the Turkish Statistical Institute. The Consumer Price Index also saw a 1.25% monthly increase, it added. The highest annual price increase was recorded in miscellaneous goods and services, transportation, and food and non-alcoholic beverages with 28.12%, 21.12%, and 20.61% respectively. Moreover, a 6% jump in electricity prices, 1% for gas prices, and 25% for bridge and highway tolls was put into effect on the first day of the new year. The tolls on the main two Bosphorus bridges that connect Asia and Europe in Istanbul have been increased from 10.5 Turkish liras to 13.25 Turkish liras. Similarly, the Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge, also known as the third bridge over the Bosphorus Strait, saw tolls jump from 21.9 Turkish liras to 27.5 Turkish liras. Meanwhile, the Osman Gazi Bridge, which links the city of Gebze to the Yalova province via the O5 motorway, saw a price hike from 117.9 Turkish liras to 147.5 Turkish liras. Similarly, the toll of the Izmir-Istanbul highway rose from 292 Turkish liras to 367 Turkish liras. The special consumption tax on alcoholic beverages and tobacco products have been increased by 17%. Under nearly 19 years of the Justice and Development Party rule, prices of alcoholic drinks have been increased by about 1,800%, mostly through taxes. Mediascope asked citizens how they evaluated the price hikes. I see this as a disaster for the country. People are desperate for bread these days. These hikes are going to render already difficult living conditions to become unbearable. This has to end. And the only way this will end is through elections. People who want to consume alcohol should be able to without a problem. Such exorbitant price hikes should not have been made.
I live with my daughter and I can barely get by. I work as a sales consultant and earn minimum wage. I have no social activities and I am able to only survive with that money. I don't know how this cycle is going to end. I am worried about the future of my daughter. We have no social life. We are people who account for every lira we spend. The situation is heartbreaking.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.